What happened to you in school that became a widespread rumor years later? I was sitting in the principal's office with no way to leave, all while my 7-year-old sister was walking home alone to our pissed stepfather. Just 60 minutes earlier, I had been doodling in math class when Finn beside me asked if I wanted to play Call of Duty over the weekend. I figured why not and wrote my gamer tag. That's when Annie, the girl sitting across from me, went absolutely pale. She bolted to the bathroom where we could all hear her throwing up. When she came back, her knees were shaking so bad she could barely walk. She stood over my desk and whispered, "You're Sketchy Fox 362?" And I said, "Yeah." I asked if she wanted to play sometime, but she just stared at me like she was afraid I'd call her. Then in a panic, packed her things and literally ran out the door. An hour later, I got called to Principal Mark's office where he was waiting with Vice Principal Colby and Mrs. Beck, the counselor. They had printed screenshots covering the entire desk. Mark's face was dark red. "We have evidence of criminal harassment, death threats, and stalking." I did a double take, and they sarcastically pointed for me to look at the photos. That's when I saw the printed Discord messages from a user named Sketchy Fox 362 saying, "I know where you live, Vicky. You'll regret ignoring me. I'll end you. Dated over 6 months." "That's not me," I said immediately. "Mars, someone else has that username." But Colby slammed his hand on the desk. "Annie identified you. You admitted it in class." I tried explaining that Xbox gamer tags aren't unique. Thousands of people could be Sketchy Fox 362, but that cut me off. "These messages include details about our school, our staff, her schedule. You're telling me that's coincidence?" I'd never even talked to Annie before today. Literally never. But Mark pulled up worse screenshots. "I'll wait for you after school. Your parents can't protect you. I know which bus you take." That's when I looked at the watch and my stomach dropped. It was 2:30, and Lynn ended school at 3. If I'm not there, she walks home alone through the drug dealer's street to our house where my stepfather would likely molest her if he caught her alone. "I need to pick up my sister," I said, but Mark blocked the door. "You're not going anywhere until police arrive." "Police? For something I didn't do?" But Colby was already on the phone. "We have a credible threat situation." I explained Lynn's only 7. She can't walk home alone. Our stepfather does things to her when I'm not there. But Beck said, "Should have come, prepared with better emergencies." Of course that's the card you play. I was getting desperate. "Check my Xbox account. I've had this gamer tag since 2018 before Annie even moved here." But Mark said, "That proves nothing. You've been planning this." They showed more screenshots with escalating violence. "I dream about hurting you. Nobody will hear you scream." And I noticed the messages called her Vicky and Annie at different times, which made no sense, but Mark said, "She changed her name trying to escape you. Transferred schools, but you found her." I kept looking at the clock. 2:45 now. Lynn would be getting her backpack ready, looking for me at pickup. "Discord has number tags," I shouted. "Mine is Sketchy Fox 362 number 4729. Check what number the stalker has." But Beck laughed. "Multiple accounts. Classic predator behavior." I was shaking now because it was 3 o'clock and Lynn would be walking out, waiting for me. When I didn't show, she'd start walking alone. "Please, one phone call. Let me get someone to pick up Lynn." But Colby said, "Criminals don't get privileges." Mark pulled up more evidence. "The IP addresses match our school network during your free periods." But I screamed, 200 kids have free period then. They weren't listening anymore, just congratulating themselves on catching me. 3:15 now. Lynn would be at the corner where the dealers stood. They'd whistle at her. She'd walk faster, scared. "She's 7. I was crying now. "Check the Discord tags. Different numbers mean different accounts." But Mark said, "Stop manipulating us with fake tears." Beck showed more messages mentioning Pennsylvania, where Annie supposedly moved from, but I'd never left this state ever. 3:30. Lynn would be unlocking our door, calling out to see if I was home. Stepfather would hear her. "I'll confess to whatever you want," I begged. "Just call someone for Lynn." But Mark smiled. "Confession under duress. Nice try." The door opened and 2 officers walked in, Mark immediately telling them about the cyberstalking, the death threats, how I'd admitted to being Sketchy Fox 362. I looked at the clock, 3:45. Lynn would be in the house now with him, probably hiding in her closet, but he always found her when I wasn't there. "Different Discord tags," I screamed as they cuffed me. "Check the numbers. Sketchy Fox 362 number 4729 versus whatever the stalker has." But they were already reading my rights while Beck told the officers how traumatized Annie was. They dragged me out as I kept screaming about Lynn, about Discord tags, about Annie being called Vicky in the same messages, nothing making sense. But nobody listened, and I knew my 7-year-old sister was currently suffering. The cops drove me past our house on the way to the station, all while I had just one thing on my mind: getting Lynn out of that house before something bad happened. The car turned into the station parking lot, and through the back window, I watched other kids from the school walking home free while I was heading to booking for something I didn't do. My hands were going numb from the cuffs cutting into my wrists, but all I could think about was Lynn probably hiding in her closet right now, hearing his footsteps coming down the hall like she always did when I wasn't there to protect her. The officers pulled me out and marched me through the back entrance, past the drunk tank where some guy was yelling about his rights. At intake, they took my phone, wallet, and shoelaces, while I kept begging for one phone call to arrange someone to get Lynn. The officer behind the desk just said I'd get my call later and pushed me toward the holding area where the metal detector started beeping. They made me take off my belt too, and then walked me down a hallway that smelled like bleach and vomit. The concrete room had 3 other kids already sitting on metal benches bolted to the walls. One had a black eye and kept spitting blood into a paper cup. Another was asleep with his head against the wall. The 3rd kid looked at me and asked what I was in for, but I couldn't even form the words to explain this nightmare. How do you tell someone you're being framed for stalking while your little sister is home with a predator? I just shook my head and sat in the corner trying not to cry as I pictured Lynn hearing stepfather's footsteps coming down the hall, the way his breathing changed. When he'd been drinking, the specific creak of her bedroom door that I'd memorized from all the times I'd rushed in to stop him. Hours passed with nothing but the fluorescent lights buzzing overhead and the occasional guard walking by to check on us. Finally, around 4, they called me for processing, which meant fingerprints first, rolling each finger in black ink and pressing them onto cards while the officer complained about having to work overtime. Then photos against a height chart, holding a placard with numbers I couldn't even read through my tears. More forms to fill out asking about medical conditions, emergency contacts, previous arrests, which was none but they didn't believe me. I I told every single person about Lynn being in danger. The intake officer, the fingerprint tech, the photographer, the nurse who checked my vitals. Each one said it wasn't their department and someone else would handle it. The nurse at least wrote something down when I explained about the abuse, but then just filed it with the rest of my paperwork. They gave me an orange jumpsuit that smelled like industrial detergent and was too big so the pants dragged on the floor. Back to the holding cell where time moved like molasses, and the black eye kid had been replaced by someone who wouldn't stop talking about how this was all a misunderstanding with his ex-girlfriend's car. Around 6 p.m., they brought me a sandwich that looked like cardboard with mystery meat, but I couldn't eat it anyway. The guard said I'd see a judge in the morning, which meant Lynn had to survive the whole night alone with him. There was absolutely nothing I could do from this cell, except imagine all the terrible things that were probably happening right now. The talking kid finally shut up when lights dimmed to this sick yellow color that made everything look diseased. I barely slept, just staring at the ceiling tiles, counting them over and over while running through every Discord conversation I'd ever had, trying to figure out who would do this. Who had the username SketchyFox362 with different numbers after the hashtag? Who knew enough about Annie to target her, but also knew about our school? The fluorescent lights never turned off completely, just dimmed enough to make shadows, but not enough to actually sleep. Every time I started to drift off, I'd picture Lynn's face when stepfather opened her door and I'd jolt awake with my heart racing. Morning came with instant oatmeal that tasted like paste and a guard telling me my public defender would arrive soon. I asked again about calling someone for Lynn and he just shrugged and said to tell the lawyer. Another hour of waiting, and then finally they brought me to a small room with a metal table and 2 chairs. Randy Hunter walked in carrying a briefcase and actually looked me in the eyes instead of through me like everyone else had. He was young, maybe late 20s, wearing a suit that didn't quite fit right and had coffee stains on his tie. He sat down and opened a yellow legal pad, then asked me to start from the beginning. I explained about Lynn and the Discord discriminators, how SketchyFox362#4729 was my tag, but the stalker must have different numbers. Really curious about why the principal seems so sure about those IP addresses matching free periods when literally hundreds of students could be using the school network then. The timing of Annie recognizing that gamer tag in class and then all this evidence suddenly appearing makes. Randy actually listened and took notes on everything I said instead of dismissing me like everyone else had. He wrote down the technical details about how Discord works, how thousands of people could have similar usernames, how the messages mentioned Pennsylvania where I'd never even been. When I told him about Lynn being home alone with our stepfather, Randy's pen stopped moving and he looked up at me. He immediately pulled out his phone and called CPS, putting it on speaker so I could hear him report Lynn's situation. Amy Fitzpatrick from CPS answered, and Randy explained everything. The abuse allegations, the 7-year-old left alone with the alleged perpetrator, the urgent need for a welfare check. Amy said they'd send someone today, and I finally breathed for the first time since yesterday afternoon. While we waited for the hearing, Randy explained that CPS would do a welfare check, but couldn't remove Lynn without evidence of abuse. My stomach twisted because stepfather was smart enough to hide things when authorities showed up. He'd done it before, when a teacher asked questions about Lynn's bruises. Randy's phone buzzed and he checked it while we waited, then turned the screen toward me showing an email from the school district to my mom with the subject line, "Emergency suspension notice, serious threat to student safety." The message said I was banned from the school property pending investigation, and that the whole district had been notified about the security threat I posed. My hands started shaking because this meant every teacher, every parent, probably every kid in town would know by dinner time. Randy took notes about the email's timing and wording, saying we'd need this for our defense, then checked his watch and said the hearing would start soon. 2 guards came to get me and walked me down a long hallway to a courtroom where a judge sat behind a tall desk looking through papers. The prosecutor stood up and started listing all the threats they found, the stalking messages, how Annie identified me in class, while Randy argued back that they had no actual proof linking me to the Discord account. The judge barely looked up from his papers while the prosecutor showed printed screenshots and talked about protecting student safety and preventing another tragedy. Randy stood and explained about Discord discriminators, how thousands of people could have the same username with different numbers, but the judge waved him off saying technical details didn't matter when a victim had positively identified me. When Randy asked for supervised internet access, so I could do schoolwork remotely, the prosecutor immediately objected, saying I'd use it to contact Annie or delete evidence. The judge agreed and set my conditions, including absolutely no internet access, no contact with Annie, or any witnesses and placement in a youth shelter since my home wasn't considered safe due to the allegations about my stepfather. Randy tried one more time to argue for limited internet just for school, but the judge cut him off and said the decision was final. The guards took me to a van where I sat between 2 other kids being transferred, and we drove for 40 minutes through neighborhoods I didn't recognize until we pulled up to a plain building with a sign saying Riverside Youth Services. Inside, a tired-looking man introduced himself as Gavin Brooks, the shelter coordinator, and handed me a stack of papers to sign, while explaining the rules about wake-up times, chores, group sessions, and phone privileges. I asked Gavin if I could call my friend Finn, who might be able to help prove my innocence, and Gavin said he'd consider it after reviewing my case file. He showed me to a small room with 2 beds, one already occupied by another kid's stuff, and told me dinner was in an hour. After eating cafeteria-style food with 12 other kids who all seemed to know why everyone else was there, Gavin called me to his office and said he'd approved 1 supervised call to Finn. I dialed Finn's number with shaking fingers, and when he answered, I quickly explained everything that had happened. Finn sounded shocked and immediately said he'd help however he could, that he knew I'd never stalk anyone, and promised to screenshot everything showing I'd used SketchyFox362 since 2018 on Xbox and Discord. He said he'd go through all our old gaming sessions and Discord chats to find proof of my number 4729 tag from months before Annie even moved here. That evening, while I was doing assigned reading in the common room, Gavin called me over and said Amy Fitzpatrick from CPS had just called with an update about their visit to my house. Amy reported that Lynn seemed fine, and my stepfather was completely cooperative, showing them Lynn's clean room and talking about what a devoted father he was. I wanted to scream because of course he acted perfect with CPS watching. He always did that when teachers or neighbors asked questions, then went right back to his sick behavior once they left. Gavin saw my face and said CPS would keep investigating, but I knew they'd already been fooled like everyone else always was. The next morning, Randy showed up with a briefcase full of legal forms, explaining we needed to file discovery requests to get the actual Discord data and school network logs that could prove my innocence. He spread out the papers on the meeting room table and showed me where to sign, explaining that Discord would have to provide the full account information for the stalker, including their discriminator number, IP addresses, and device information. Randy said the school district would fight our request for network logs, but we had to try anyway since those logs would show exactly which device sent the threats. He explained the whole process could take weeks because companies and schools always drag their feet on discovery requests, especially in cases involving minors. After Randy left, I spent the entire day in my room with a notebook writing down every single detail I could remember about the messages they'd shown me in the principal's office. I wrote how some messages called her Vicky and others called her Annie, how they mentioned specific places in Pennsylvania I'd never heard of, how they referenced teachers at her old school I couldn't possibly know. I filled 12 pages with observations about the writing style, the threats that didn't sound like anything I'd ever say, the mentions of her schedule from before she moved here. Randy had said these inconsistencies would matter for building reasonable doubt, so I documented everything my brain could pull up from those terrible screenshots. 2 days later, Randy texted Gavin asking him to show me something on his phone since I couldn't have my own. And it was screenshots from Finn showing my Xbox profile with SketchyFox362 from 2018, plus Discord messages between us from 6 months ago, clearly showing my number 4729 tag in the header. Finn had gone through hundreds of messages and gaming sessions to find the oldest proof he could, even getting other kids from our gaming group to confirm they'd known me as SketchyFox362, number 4729 for years. Randy said it wasn't conclusive proof, but it was building our case that someone else with a different discriminator was the real stalker. That afternoon, a detective named Zoe Nolan came to interview me at the shelter, and unlike everyone else who'd already decided I was guilty, she actually pulled out a notepad when I started explaining how Discord discriminators worked. She asked specific questions about the technical details, writing down that discriminators were 4-digit codes that made usernames unique, that you could search for someone using both their username and discriminator, and that the system was designed specifically to allow multiple people to have the same display name. Detective Nolan said she'd verify this information with their cybercrimes unit and seemed genuinely interested when I explained that the stalker's messages showed knowledge about Annie's life in Pennsylvania that I couldn't possibly have. She took photos of all my handwritten notes about the message inconsistencies and said she'd review them carefully. The next day, Randy called the shelter to update me that he'd filed an emergency motion asking the court to order the school to preserve all their network logs before they automatically deleted after 30 days. The school's lawyer had immediately opposed it, calling it a fishing expedition and arguing that preserving logs would violate other students' privacy, but Randy had argued that the logs were critical evidence that would prove my innocence. The judge had scheduled a hearing for the following week to decide on the motion, and Randy said he was cautiously optimistic because judges usually granted preservation requests in criminal cases. 2 days later, Amy Fitzpatrick called the shelter to tell me she'd scheduled something called a forensic interview with Lynn at her elementary school for the following week. She said kids often felt safer talking at the school instead of home or offices, and they had a special room with toys and art supplies where trained interviewers worked with children. My stomach twisted knowing Lynn would have to describe what stepfather did to her, but I also felt relief that maybe someone would finally listen to her. Amy said I couldn't be there or even nearby because they needed Lynn to speak freely without worrying about protecting me or mom. The next morning, Randy showed up at the shelter with a thick folder of papers the school district had sent over after the judge ordered them to preserve their network logs. The IT department's report showed the threatening messages definitely came from the school's IP addresses during my 4th period free time, but Randy pointed out that over 200 students had that same free period. Anyone could have logged into the guest Wi-Fi with a fake email address and sent those messages. Randy's taking notes like he's solving a mystery instead of just pushing papers around. Finally, someone who knows the difference between a username and a witch hunt. The logs didn't show which specific device sent them, just that they came from somewhere on campus during those times. I was looking through the screenshots again when something clicked in my brain. The stalker had mentioned Mrs. Henderson's English class using a Monday, Wednesday, Friday schedule, but our school stopped doing that 2 years ago when we switched to block scheduling. Annie only moved here last year, so she never even had the old schedule. Randy's eyes got wide when I explained this, and he started writing notes really fast about how this proved someone from Annie's old school in Pennsylvania was involved. That afternoon, Gavin knocked on my door and handed me the shelter phone, telling me to look at something Randy had texted him. My hands started shaking when I saw screenshots from Instagram and Twitter with my yearbook photo edited to have Predator written in red letters across my face. Someone had posted it everywhere saying I was a dangerous stalker who threatened to kill a girl, and hundreds of people were sharing it and commenting horrible things about me. I scrolled through comment after comment calling me disgusting, saying I should be locked up forever, hoping I'd get what I deserved in jail. The rage built up so fast I couldn't control it, and before I knew what I was doing, I punched the wall hard enough to leave a dent. Gavin grabbed the phone away and made me sit down while he wrapped ice around my knuckles, telling me this was exactly what the real stalker wanted, to destroy my reputation so badly that even when I was proven innocent, nobody would believe it. 3 days later, Finn showed up at the shelter during visiting hours carrying a folder stuffed with printed papers. He'd spent days going through our gaming history and found matches where I was definitely online playing Call of Duty at the exact times some of the threats were sent. He'd reached out to other players from those matches who remembered me being there because I'd gotten some crazy kills or we'd won together. Finn had screen screenshots of the match results with timestamps, plus messages from 5 different players confirming I was in those games. Randy said it wasn't absolute proof since someone could claim I was playing while also sending messages on another device, but it was another piece of evidence showing the timeline didn't match. That weekend, Randy picked me up to watch a live stream on his laptop of an emergency school board meeting about student safety. Parents packed the auditorium demanding to know how a dangerous predator was allowed in the school with their children. One mom stood up crying about how her daughter was terrified to go to the school, knowing a stalker had been there. Another dad said, I should never be allowed within 1,000 feet of any school ever again. The board members nodded along and promised they were taking every measure to ensure student safety, basically agreeing I was guilty without saying it directly. Randy was typing notes the whole time about defamation and how we could sue them later for destroying my reputation without evidence. Detective Nolan called Randy's phone the next day while he was visiting the shelter, and Randy put it on speaker so I could hear. She'd gotten more information from Discord's legal team, confirming that discriminator numbers were unique identifiers that couldn't be duplicated. She'd issued a more detailed subpoena asking for the full account information for both Sketchy Fox 362#4729 and whatever discriminator the stalker account used. She actually sounded interested in the technical evidence now, instead of just assuming I was guilty. Randy thanked her and said we'd been gathering our own evidence that pointed to someone from Annie's previous school. 2 days after that, Randy brought a new person to the shelter, an IT consultant named Seth Calderon, who specialized in digital forensics and cybercrime investigations. Seth pulled out his laptop and started explaining things even Detective Nolan hadn't thought about, like how someone could spoof MAC addresses to make it look like messages came from a different device. He showed us how the school's guest Wi-Fi had basically no security, so anyone with basic tech knowledge could hide their real identity while making it look like someone else sent the messages. Seth said he'd seen cases where stalkers deliberately picked usernames similar to other people's to frame them if they got caught. While Seth was explaining the technical stuff, I suddenly remembered another detail from those screenshots. The threats had mentioned Mr. Peterson's history class and Ms. Rodriguez's Spanish class, but those were teachers at Annie's old school in Pennsylvania. I'd never heard those names before seeing the messages. Randy got excited and had Seth start documenting this in a technical report about how it would be impossible for me to know about teachers from a school I'd never attended in a state I'd never visited. Seth said this was the kind of specific detail that could prove someone from Annie's past was the real stalker. A week later, Amy Fitzpatrick called Randy to report on Lynn's forensic interview, and Randy called me right after to tell me what she'd said. Amy couldn't give specific details because of the ongoing investigation, but she used the words concerning disclosures and said they were opening a full investigation into our home situation. She said Lynn had been very brave and told them things that required immediate action. My heart broke, thinking about my little sister having to describe the awful things stepfather did when I wasn't there to protect her. But I also felt relief that she'd finally told someone who would actually do something about it. The next morning, Detective Nolan called Randy with something that made him actually excited for the first time. She'd been digging through the threat messages and noticed the oldest ones came from IP addresses in Pennsylvania from 6 months ago. These messages happened before Annie even moved to our state, which meant someone from her old life was doing this. Randy immediately called me at the shelter to share the news, and I could hear papers shuffling as he talked. Detective Nolan was finally taking the technical stuff seriously and had started mapping out when each threat came from where. She found a pattern where the Pennsylvania messages stopped right when Annie moved here and then started again from our school network. This meant the stalker followed Annie here, or had someone helping them, which explained why they knew our school details. 2 days later, Amy Fitzpatrick went to interview my mom as part of the CPS investigation, and Randy got the report that afternoon. Mom sat there telling Amy that stepfather was wonderful with Lynn and would never hurt her. She said I was making things up because I didn't like him and was jealous of their relationship. Amy told Randy she sees this pattern all the time, where moms protect the abuser instead of the kid. Mom even showed Amy pictures of stepfather taking Lynn to the park, like that proved he was a good person. The CPS worker wrote down everything, but Randy said Amy's notes showed she didn't believe Mom at all. They scheduled more interviews and started talking to neighbors and Lynn's teachers about what they'd noticed. 3 days after that, I got my weekly supervised phone call with Mom at the shelter office. She complained about CPS bothering her, and then mentioned Lynn was having bad dreams every night. Lynn wouldn't come out of her room except for meals and kept asking when I was coming home. Mom thought Lynn just missed me, but I knew those were signs of what stepfather was doing to her. I wanted to scream at Mom to wake up and see what was happening, but the call was recorded. Instead, I just told her to make sure Lynn's door had a lock and to check on her at night. Mom said I was being dramatic and changed the subject to how the neighbors were gossiping about our family. Meanwhile, Seth had been working on tracing the stalker's Discord account and found something huge. The account was created using a phone number with area code 267, which is Pennsylvania, not our state. He tracked the number to a burner phone bought at a store near Annie's old school 3 weeks before she moved. The receipt showed cash payment, but the store had security footage from that day that Seth was trying to get. This proved I couldn't have bought that phone since I'd never been to Pennsylvania in my life. Randy took all this evidence and filed a motion with the court to let me use the internet for school. He argued that the evidence was showing I was innocent, and keeping me from education was hurting my future. The judge read through everything and granted 2 hours of supervised internet daily just for schoolwork. The shelter had to watch me the whole time and check what sites I visited, but at least I could try to catch up. Detective Nolan went back to interview Annie with all the new evidence we'd found about Pennsylvania. Annie sat there looking at the phone records and IP addresses and finally admitted something important. She wasn't sure anymore if my voice from class matched the writing style of the threatening messages. Then she mentioned an ex-boyfriend from Pennsylvania named Drew, who got really mad when she moved away. Detective Nolan wrote everything down and said she'd look into this Drew person right away. Annie started crying and said she felt terrible if she'd identified the wrong person but was so scared she just reacted. The detective told her it wasn't her fault and that whoever was stalking her was very clever about framing someone else. The next day, I finally logged into my school account for my 2 hours of internet time. My inbox had hundreds of missed assignments and angry messages from teachers asking why I wasn't doing work. One teacher even wrote that I was refusing to submit assignments when I was literally locked up without internet. Another teacher had marked me as absent for 3 weeks straight, even though the school knew I was suspended. My grades had dropped from A's and B's to F's across the board because of all the zeros. How did Seth figure out that phone number was from Pennsylvania? Just by looking at the area code. The way he tracked down that burner phone purchase is really smart. I wonder if stores always keep security footage that long. I started working on assignments, but 2 hours wasn't enough to make any real progress on catching up. Seth kept digging into the technical evidence and found something weird in the school's DHPC logs. There was a device connecting to the network during the times threats were sent, but it didn't match any registered student laptop. Someone had brought their own computer and connected it to the guest network to send the messages. The MAC address of this mystery device showed up over and over during the exact times of the threats. Seth said this was proof someone was deliberately using the school network to make it look like the messages came from a student. He started trying to trace what kind of device it was based on the MAC address format. A week later, Amy Fitzpatrick called Randy with news that made me feel relieved and destroyed at the same time. They were placing Lynn in emergency foster care while they investigated the abuse allegations. She'd be safe from stepfather but would lose everything familiar like her room and toys and school friends. Randy said this was actually good because it meant CPS believed Lynn about the abuse, even if mom wouldn't admit it. The foster family had experience with traumatized kids and lived close enough that Lynn could stay in her same school. Amy said Lynn was scared but understood it was temporary while they made things safe for her. That same day, the library near school sent over security footage from a day when threats were sent. The video showed someone in a dark, hooded sweatshirt using the public computers at the exact time a threat message was sent. The person kept their head down and hood up so you couldn't see their face at all, but the timestamp matched perfectly with when Annie got a message saying terrible things about hurting her. The library staff said anyone could walk in and use those computers without signing in or showing ID. Randy called me the next morning with news that changed everything. He'd been digging through Annie's old school records from Pennsylvania and found something nobody expected. Annie had dated a guy named Drew McKinney back at her old school before she moved here, and Drew had gotten in trouble twice for harassing other students after breakups. The school had disciplinary records showing he'd sent threatening messages to 2 different girls who dumped him. Randy also discovered Drew's cousin lived in our town and went to the community college, which meant he had guest access to our high school's Wi-Fi whenever he visited. The cousin played on our school's basketball court every Tuesday and Thursday with other college kids who had alumni passes. Detective Nolan started looking into Drew right away and found his social media accounts were full of angry posts about Annie. He'd written things about her betraying him by moving away, how she'd abandoned what they had, how she'd pay for leaving him behind. The detective showed Randy screenshots where Drew called Annie a traitor and said she'd regret choosing her parents over him. His Discord username turned out to be SketchyFox365, just 3 numbers different from mine, with the discriminator number 8462 instead of my number 4729. The shelter made me start online counseling sessions twice a week as part of their requirements for residents. The therapist was this older woman who actually listened when I explained everything that happened. She helped me work through how scared I'd been for Lynn while trapped in that office, how nobody would listen about the Discord tags being different. She told me my instinct to protect Lynn showed strong character, that most teenagers wouldn't have fought so hard for their siblings. The sessions helped me process the anger I felt at being accused of something so terrible while my real concern was Lynn's safety. Discord finally responded to the subpoena after 3 weeks of waiting. The official response confirmed the stalker account used discriminator number 8462, completely different from my number 4729. They provided account creation dates, showing the stalker account was made 6 months ago, right when Annie said the harassment started. My account dated back to 2018 with years of normal gaming conversations and no threatening messages to anyone. The report also showed the stalker account only ever messaged Annie and nobody else, while mine had hundreds of conversations with different gamers over the years. Seth kept analyzing the technical evidence and made a huge breakthrough with the MAC address from the unauthorized device. He traced it to a laptop registered to Drew McKinney at his Pennsylvania school through the manufacturer's database. The laptop had connected to our school's guest network 17 times over 6 months, always on Tuesdays and Thursdays when his cousin came to play basketball. Seth created a timeline showing the threat messages matched exactly with when Drew's laptop was on our network. He even found security footage from the parking lot showing someone matching Drew's description walking into the building on days threats were sent. Detective Nolan flew to Pennsylvania to interview Drew in person. Drew immediately called a lawyer and refused to answer questions, but he couldn't explain why his laptop kept showing up at our school. His cousin finally admitted Drew had asked him to check on Annie, see who she was hanging out with, if she was dating anyone new. The cousin claimed he didn't know about any threats or stalking, just thought Drew wanted to know if Annie was okay. The cousin gave police his guest access logs showing he'd given Drew his login credentials multiple times. Amy Fitzpatrick called Randy with an update about Lynn that made me cry with relief. Lynn was adjusting well to her foster family and had started opening up about what stepfather did to her. The foster parents were experienced with traumatized kids and knew how to help her feel safe. Lynn was finally sleeping through the whole night without nightmares, eating regular meals and even making friends with the foster family's daughter who was close to her age. Amy said Lynn asked about me every day and couldn't wait to see me again. The district attorney's office reviewed all the new evidence and made their decision. They determined there wasn't enough evidence to prosecute me, given everything pointing to Drew as the real stalker. Randy said they'd formally decline charges within the next few days, though my arrest record would stay on file until we could petition to have it expunged. The prosecutor admitted privately to Randy that they should have investigated more thoroughly before arresting a minor, but they'd never put that admission in writing. Principal Mark and Vice Principal Colby refused to admit they'd been wrong about anything. They sent a letter to Randy saying they'd followed proper protocols for handling threats and stood by their decision to call police. The school board backed them up completely, releasing a statement about how student safety had to come first, and they'd acted appropriately based on the information available at the time. They wouldn't apologize or acknowledge they'd rushed to judgment without checking basic facts like Discord tags being different. 2 days later, Drew got arrested in Pennsylvania on federal charges for cyberstalking and harassment across state lines. The FBI got involved because he'd used internet services to threaten someone in another state. Annie had to provide a victim impact statement about how the threats had destroyed her sense of safety and made her suspect innocent people like me. She wrote about the constant fear, checking over her shoulder everywhere, not trusting anyone because she didn't know who was really sending the messages. 3 weeks passed before Amy called about my first supervised visit with Lynn at the CPS office downtown. I walked into that plain beige room with toys scattered on a small table, and Lynn jumped up from the plastic chair and ran straight into my arms, crying so hard her whole body shook. She kept saying my name over and over while I held her tight and felt her tiny heart beating fast against my chest. The social worker sat in the corner taking notes while Lynn pulled back and looked at me with those big eyes all red and puffy. She whispered that she tried to be brave like I taught her when the bad things happened, but it was so hard when I wasn't there. I promised her right then that she'd never have to be that brave again because I was gonna make sure she stayed safe no matter what. We played with blocks for an hour while she told me about her foster family's dog and how she was learning to ride a bike with training wheels. When our time was up, she grabbed onto my shirt and wouldn't let go until the social worker gently pulled her away. 2 days later, Randy called to tell me the school was scheduling a disciplinary hearing, even though all criminal charges got dropped. They were claiming I still violated their code of conduct by creating a disruption, and they wanted to decide if I could come back. Randy spent the whole week preparing evidence, printing out all the Discord logs showing different tag numbers, getting statements from Finn about my gaming history, organizing Seth's technical report about the spoofed MAC addresses. He said we had to show them how badly they screwed up by not checking basic facts before calling the cops on a kid. The hearing was set for the following Monday at the district office, and Randy told me to wear nice clothes and stay calm no matter what they said. We showed up at 8 in the morning to a conference room full of school board members, Principal Mark sitting there with his arms crossed, Vice Principal Colby looking smug, and Mrs. Beck shuffling papers like she had better things to do. Randy started presenting the Discord evidence, showing them on a projector how the stalker account had tag number 8462, while mine was 4729, explaining how these were unique identifiers that proved it wasn't me. The timing of Drew's laptop showing up on those exact days makes me wonder if his cousin knew more than he's letting on. Something about him giving Drew those login codes 17 times feels like more than just checking if Annie was okay. Seth got up and explained the technical stuff about how someone spoofed the school network, using Drew's laptop and his cousin's guest access. The board members started shifting in their seats and looking at each other while Mark's face got redder and redder. Beck interrupted Randy to say I was still manipulative and played the victim card to get sympathy, that even if I didn't send the messages, I still caused chaos at the school. Randy pulled up Drew's arrest record and guilty plea, showing them the FBI report confirming he was the stalker, but Beck just shrugged and said that didn't change the disruption I caused. After 3 hours of back and forth, the board went into a private room to vote while we waited in the hallway. They came back and announced they'd allow me to return, but with conditions including staying away from Annie, weekly check-ins with the counselor, and any violation would mean immediate expulsion. No apology for what they put me through, no admission they were wrong, just grudging permission to finish my education like they were doing me some huge favor. Meanwhile, Mom was fighting the CPS case hard, telling them Lynn was lying about stepfather, that I was putting ideas in her head, that everything was fine at home. Amy told Randy that Mom was in complete denial, but the forensic evidence was clear and they weren't backing down. It took another month of court hearings and supervised visits before Mom finally broke down and admitted maybe she didn't want to see what was happening. She agreed to divorce stepfather and enter therapy to understand why she didn't protect Lynn when all the signs were there. The court approved a reunification plan that would take at least 6 months of therapy and parenting classes, but could eventually bring Lynn home safe if Mom followed through. 3 days after Mom signed the divorce papers, the cops arrested stepfather at his job when the forensic evidence from Lynn's medical exams came back, confirming everything she'd disclosed. They held him without bail, since he was a flight risk with family in Mexico and a history of not showing up to court. Mom called me crying that night, saying she couldn't believe she let a monster into our lives and hurt her baby girl. I went back to the school on a Tuesday morning, and it was exactly as bad as I expected. Half the kids still thought I was guilty and would move away when I walked by. The other half just pretended I didn't exist. Finn met me at my locker and walked with me to every class, sitting next to me at lunch when nobody else would come near our table. A few kids gradually started talking to me again after Finn told them about all the evidence proving I was innocent. Then one day between 3rd and 4th period, Annie walked up to me in the hallway while everyone watched. She said she was sorry for identifying me wrong, that the trauma made her see threats everywhere and hear things that weren't real. I told her it wasn't her fault, that Drew was good at manipulation, and I was just glad they caught the real stalker before he could hurt her worse. She nodded and walked away fast while everyone whispered about what just happened. That same week, Drew took a plea deal to avoid trial, getting 2 years in state prison plus 5 years probation with 0 internet access allowed. Detective Nolan called Randy to let us know Drew's cousin wouldn't face charges since he was basically just a pawn who didn't know what Drew was really doing with the login info. Randy started working on filing for expungement of my arrest record, explaining it could take a whole year of paperwork and court dates, but should eventually clear my name legally so this wouldn't follow me forever. He'd become more than just my lawyer by then. He was someone who believed me when literally nobody else would, who fought for me when everyone wanted to throw me away. The next Tuesday, Seth stood at the school board meeting with his laptop connected to the big screen showing how easy it was to fake someone's digital identity. He pulled up live demos of spoofed MAC addresses and duplicate usernames while parents in the audience started recording on their phones and whispering to each each other. The board members kept shifting in their seats as Seth explained how the school's investigation protocols were basically worthless without proper tech verification. Some parents actually stood up demanding better training for staff and real investigation procedures before destroying kids' lives. Meanwhile, I was back at the shelter, helping 3 younger kids with their math homework, since Gavin noticed I was good at explaining things. One kid couldn't understand fractions, so I used pizza slices to show him, and suddenly it clicked for him. Gavin watched from the doorway and told me I should think about becoming a teacher since I had natural patience with kids who'd been through trauma. 2 weeks later, Lynn's foster mom called to invite me to Lynn's 8th birthday party at their house. When I got there, Lynn was wearing a sparkly dress and playing tag with other kids in the backyard, like any normal 8-year-old would. She ran over and hugged me tight, then dragged me to see her cake, which had unicorns all over it. Her therapist was there too, and mentioned Lynn was making amazing progress with her trauma work. The foster family had decorated everything in bright pink and purple, which Lynn loved, and she was actually laughing while opening presents. Mom showed up halfway through the party for her supervised visit with Amy, watching from the kitchen. Lynn was nervous at first, but Mom had been doing her therapy work and knew to let Lynn come to her instead of forcing affection. They sat together, eating cake, while Mom asked about Lynn's new school and friends without bringing up anything heavy. Amy pulled me aside to say Mom was actually following through with all her requirements, and the therapist thought reunification could work if she stayed committed. 3 months crawled by with me barely passing my classes since I'd missed so much school during everything. Graduation day came without any big ceremony for me, but when I walked across that stage, Finn was cheering from the audience along with Randy, and even Detective Nolan, who'd driven down just to see me graduate. My grades were trash, but several state colleges accepted me anyway after Randy wrote letters explaining the circumstances. That same week, stepfather finally took a plea deal after his lawyer told him the evidence was overwhelming. 15 years, with no early release possibility and lifetime sex offender registration, meant Lynn would be an adult before he could even try to contact us. The prosecutor called to say Lynn wouldn't have to testify, which made me cry from relief since she'd been terrified about facing him in court. Mom got the divorce finalized, and after 6 months of perfect compliance with CPS, the judge approved Lynn coming home with monitoring for another year. We packed up the old house in one day and moved across town to a 2-bedroom apartment near Lynn's new school. Lynn picked bright yellow paint for her room and covered the walls with drawings of butterflies and rainbows. Mom got a job at a grocery store and started taking parenting classes at night to learn how to really protect Lynn. I spent the summer before college helping them settle in and watching Lynn slowly become the happy kid she deserved to be. The day before I left for school, I was throwing clothes in boxes when Lynn came in and sat on my bed. She said she wanted to be brave like me when she grew up, which made my chest tight. I told her she was already the bravest person I knew for surviving everything and telling the truth when it mattered. She helped me tape up the boxes, then we went to get ice cream, and I knew we were both going to make it through this. Thanks for letting me share my 2 cents while we watched this whole thing unfold. Catch you on the flip side, friend. If you made it to the end, drop a comment. I love reading all your comments.